here. Good morning to everyone and welcome to History Matters and So Does Coffee. As ever, a lot. Today, there were a lot of topics that I was thinking about talking about, although last night at about 5 in the morning, I realized the one that I could have talked about. And I could talk about some of the things that came to mind and why they came to mind, but we've had, I think, twice before in the more than 2 years that we've been doing this, maybe twice before, the Anything Goes session. And what that means is we're just going to talk. And it's bring your questions. Hopefully I can answer most of them. I'm sure there will be some that I can't. But since this is such an amazing community, and particularly in the last few weeks, you folks have been coming up with really amazing, daunting questions. So this is a little daunting. That's what we're going to do today. But before we do that, I will turn to my partner in crime to explain the particular rules of the game for today.
Hi, everybody. I'm Annie Evans. If this is your first time tuning in, I work at the New American History Project at University of Richmond. And every Friday, it's my great delight to be here with all of you and to help Joanne by fielding the questions in the Q&A. So typically, you guys listen to a fabulous talk with Joanne and engage in the chat. And then around 10:30, we take it out to the Q&A for questions. But today, as Joanne explained, we're going to have a more open-ended conversation. So I will still monitor the Q&A and I'll send those questions your way, Joanne, if that still works for you. And that way, if people are chatting, that's great, but we'll have the questions over here in the Q&A box and I'll just feed them to you as time permits. Okay.
Perfect. And also I will thank you, Dave, for the reminder. Anyone who is here for the first time, please let us know in chat because as I said at the outset before we were officially started, this is an amazing community of people, and you will be welcomed into the community if this is your first or second time here. So anyway, let us know if you're new. The other thing I'll mention before we plunge in is there will be a little surprise at the end of the episode. I will tell you nothing more about it. There will be a little surprise at the end of the episode. Oh, okay, CJP, first time from Washington State. Welcome. Yay. I love when there's a new person here because it's nice to welcome people. Okay. Oh, that's right. And be sure that you chat to everyone so everyone can see what you're saying.
All right. Are we ready to jump in?
We're ready to jump in, gulp. Yes.
All right. Well, our friend Dave, who's already been chatting us up in the chat, asks, he says in Wisconsin, they are facing pretty much a 50-50 split for the election. And given gerrymandering, that the representatives from the Republican side could gain a supermajority in both the Assembly and Senate. He wanted to know if there was any historical precedent for that sort of failure on a Republican form of government. That's his words, not mine.
Right. Well, so Newbie just made the weirdest noise. He just went, ah?
Heard him.
At any rate, speaking in the long term and looking sort of broadly at elections, way back before this current moment, when things started to get somewhat bizarre with people attacking our electoral process or questioning our electoral process, I did think back to, and I guess this is particularly because of my last book, I spent a lot of time reading the congressional record. It was relatively common that people would be unsure as to who was actually really elected to Congress. And sometimes that was because there would be competing claims. And then both people would show up and then they would have to present their case. And then there would be a decision about who got in or who didn't get in. So which is a very long way of saying it's not as though everything has been functional, because the question there was, has there ever been this kind of, I can't remember what the word was, malfunction or dysfunction or something. At any rate, there have been weird irregularities forever. I've said this before about this particular moment, that one of the things that's distinctive about right now is the degree to which people are questioning just the fundamental electoral system. We're not even talking about gerrymandering, which goes back to Elbridge Gerry. And yes, it is Elbridge Gerry, yet gerrymandering. And I don't know why. I couldn't tell you. But at any rate, there has been, in one way or another, there have been many, many, many attempts to do things to the electoral system for one way or another. I've talked before, I think about one of the elections, I think in Pennsylvania in the 1790s, where one side, actually the Jeffersonian Republican side, the sort of operative guy in Pennsylvania, wrote up ballots, because if you spelled someone's name wrong on the ballot, sometimes your ballot would be discounted, right? So people, even all the way, we're talking like 1792, they printed out or wrote out, not even printed, but wrote out ballots to hand out to people so that they could vote and hand in the ballot with all the names spelled correctly and their votes would count, and so that every Jeffersonian Republican running would get their vote. And it was some crazy number. It's in my first book. I want to say that they created like 10,000 of these ballots that they handed out to people so that they could vote correctly. I know, newbie, it's shocking. I know, but it's true. At any rate, so in one way or another, there has been weirdness in our electoral process. The weirdness of this moment is not only questioning the electoral process, not only, sort of attacking it in a variety of ways, but that at very high levels, there are people who are basically questioning it, saying that they no longer really abide by it in some ways. That's a new level of pending dysfunction, I guess I would say. So I know I'm not specifically addressing Wisconsin, but yeah, the short answer is there have been irregularities in a variety of ways for a very long time, from the beginning, but no two moments are necessarily the same. And this one is distinctive in a number of ways, which I know in past weeks we've talked about as well.
Okay, we have more questions. This one's from Melissa Elliott. It says, did founders realize that aristocrats like demagogues as much as regular people? In Kristen Kolb DeMuse's book, Jesus and John Wayne, it becomes clear that powerful pastors went looking for a demagogue to use for their purposes.
So read the beginning of that again.
Wanted to know, did the founders realize that aristocrats like demagogues as much as regular people?
Oh,
That book as an example.
Yeah. I don't think, well, I do think that the elite founding folk did assume that the general public, they on the one hand assumed correctly that a democratic republic, a Republican small r form of government, relied on public opinion to an extreme degree, more than certainly was the case in a monarchy, which pretty much the rest of the world was. So what that meant was, in part, someone who came along who was particularly skilled at swaying the populace, a demagogue of one kind or another, could be a real danger in a republic. And so they talk about that again and again and again. And certainly they assumed that the voting public could fall for that kind of a ploy. And then of course the idea is that person gets into power and then does whatever the heck they want, regardless of what the public wants. And that, read the writings of that generation of people, don't even have to do it for very long, and you see that fear everywhere, all over the place. That's the sort of ultimate fear at the heart of a really democratic form of government, is the same thing that makes it potentially really reflective of the populace, means that if something happens to really shape the views of the populace, maybe not in the most straightforward way, it's vulnerable to that too. So I've already forgotten the question while I'm answering it here. Oh, okay, I'm back. It came back. I haven't had enough coffee yet, but I don't think that the founding generation assumed that only the masses would be swayed by a demagogue. I don't think they would say to each other, like, you're likely to be fooled. I think they did assume that that kind of person, you just never knew how and why and when they would take power. And I think a great example of that actually is Aaron Burr and Hamilton. right? Hamilton really thought that pretty much defined Burr, a demagogue, somebody who was really good at, appealing to the public. And he had this lofty father, and he had a lofty grandfather, Jonathan Edwards. And he, I think Hamilton at one point says he's the equivalent of New England royalty, and he'll say or do whatever it takes at any given moment to get whatever he wants. And at some point in the election of 1800, someone, a fellow Federalist, writes to Hamilton and says, Burr's a handy guy to have around. Like, he'll say or do whatever you want. And it's really great to have that kind of guy around. Hamilton's basically like, what? Is that good? So he's engaging with fellow elite people who are saying, like, wow, that's, kind of politically cool, that guy. Like, maybe we could use him. He could be on our side. So I think there are different ways that people could be taken in by demagogues. I don't think people assumed only the masses could be the victims.
All right. I like this unscripted one. Okay, so this is from Ellen. She says, Joanne, I wanted to get your opinion about the Twitter Elon Musk thing. If he starts charging for Twitter, how many of us will leave? If he lets 45 back on, will more people leave? Just overall impressions of the new development this week.
I will offer some. That was the thing that at 5 a.m. I thought I could have talked about that. So thank you, Ellen, because now I can think about it. I talked, I don't know how long ago, probably the first time the question of this, of Musk taking over was raised. And I said that as much as, everyone attacks Twitter, rightly so, for spreading misinformation, for being nasty, for spreading insults, for all of the ways in which it's bad, one thing that Twitter actually does is create a space for a we. And I talk about a we, right? We need a we, our we isn't strong enough. I've been saying that forever here on History Matters too. But what I said back then was, if Twitter just poof vanishes, where is that we space? Not that this current space as it exists isn't flawed and dangerous in many ways, but if it poof, already an early poof, if we were playing bingo, someone might have gotten bingo. But let's say it vanished right now. Think about the fact that how would you know sort of what's circulating out there in the world, what people you respect and admire, like what they're thinking? There would be no kind of, I guess, public square. There would be no space where you could gather and exchange views and exchange ideas and come together with common purpose, perhaps. There are many ways in which I think Twitter is pragmatic and functional. And so at the time, I remember thinking of a quote, which I thought of last night when I was realizing that I could have talked about this for today's subject. In 1800, I believe, 1799 or 1800. Wow, Burr is getting a double mention here. Burr was worried in New York that he and his followers didn't have enough influence. And one of the main reasons why was because they didn't have a dedicated newspaper. Other sects and factions had their own dedicated newspaper, and Burr and his followers didn't. And I'm not going to get the wording right, except for the word atoms. He said something like, without a newspaper, we are but individual atoms, right? We're all just out here, like there's no we. We're just out here being individual little bouncing atoms. There's no way to collect and give a message. Newby's very upset at this. I know. But anyway, that quote occurred to me many years ago. That quote is what I'm thinking about now, which is, for all of the ways in which Twitter is dangerous, and I will acknowledge that it is dangerous in many ways, that prime function of it being a meeting place for shared ideas and common purpose, I think that's important. And, I, as much as anyone, I get attacked, I get irritated by the lies and misinformation floating around. Those who use Twitter with any frequency have a high, we're all sort of walk around with maybe one fist clenched, maybe not two. But I think as a space, it's really important. And I think without it, all the way back, and now once again, particularly now, what I was thinking about last night is how interesting that this is just before an election, right? Which would be a fine moment for people to be able to come together and exchange ideas and engage with each other and come together in shared purpose, shared cause, this is an interesting moment for that to get not necessarily destroyed, but it's being chipped away at, right? I don't know what's happening, although I think probably some people are leaving and other people are thinking about leaving, but it's an interesting moment that that's happening, particularly because of what I just said, that I think places where people can come together, as flawed as they are pretty vital. You know, it makes me think about before we had iPhones, and if you were at, let's say you're at a festival and you told your friend you'd meet them there, and there you are, and that person is there, and you have no idea how you're ever going to find. I remember when I asked someone, one of my colleagues at Yale, like, why would I ever need social media? It was a while ago. And he said this, right? He said, imagine you're at in a crowd and you're trying to find somebody. How do you do that unless you know that you can contact them? And whether it's a text message or in one way or another, there's a new space where you can contact and engage with people. And I hadn't thought before about that. And, you know, I think now in some ways we take that space for granted. And as someone said last night when I was pondering this question, there's always, you know, something new will come down the tracks. There'll be another form, another format, and that's probably true. I don't know when it happens. And at this particular moment, among the many things I'm concerned about, what happens in this big public square is one of the things that I'm worried about. I don't know, you know, I'm sticking around. Newbie and I are sticking around because I'm going to still be offering balanced historical content.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the historians that weighed in when you guys were all live tweeting during the January 6 hearings.
Yeah.
Like so many teachers have commented on how helpful that was. And then I think about all the Twitter chats that teachers specifically, like every Monday night for the last 13 years, I have been on the SS chat, which is where all the history teachers hang out. And I just can't imagine that. I mean, it's a big community, but it started like this size, right? And then got bigger and bigger like this community did. And it makes me sad if that all goes away, because a lot of teachers that live in rural areas, that they're the only geography teacher or they're the only 10th grade history teacher for miles. They have no one else to get information and share resources with except this group on Monday nights. And it'd be so sad if that all went away, you know?
Right. And I think people are asking good questions, which is why does everything change with Musk in charge? And we don't know. One way it might change is that there's a higher level of nastiness and misinformation that makes it hard to be there and engage. Again, I don't know. Maybe things get charged for something. Maybe we don't know. I mean, we really don't know. Newbie, you can relax now. He's like really agitated. I don't know why. And someone said Newbie will have his own Twitter account. You realize Newbie does have his own.
Right. Right. That's what we were just saying. You got to look for Newbie the History Bird.
It's History Newbie is his handle. History Newbie. At any rate, right. I know that Musk is firing people, and we just don't know. Extreme contingency. Someone else would have gotten bingo. But at any rate, we don't know what's going to happen. It could end up being a bad space. The tenor of it could change, the tone of it could change, the reliability of it could change, the size of it could change dramatically. I just don't know. So, you know, I'm watching and waiting like I think we all should, but I don't. Someone said, I saw someone say this and it has now floated out of view. Running away immediately at this moment, pulling back in anticipation of badness is indeed ceding the space. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, I think it's Tim Snyder's book about tyranny, in which he says, don't surrender in advance. And he has a much more concise way of putting it, but it's like, don't give up in advance, you know, and I understand totally. I'm not actually telling people what to do. If you leave and want to leave, that's fine, you know, whatever. But I do think a lot of us should stick around because it is our space too. It is. And there needs to be an actual conversation, which means there needs to be disagreement, there need to be facts, there needs any number of different things will go away depending on how people stay or leave or how they use Twitter. So I actually think in a political way and a pragmatic way, it's meaningful and a little nervous making that Twitter is now in this, state where someone whose politics certainly lean one way and who likes to be in the limelight is now taking over. Maybe, all of the, I don't want to call it angst, which is a little extreme. Maybe all of the uneasiness, better word, about what's happening now will be, too much. I don't know. But I think there's a more pragmatic political importance here than maybe some people are realizing when, they're like, oh, well, who needs it anyway? I think that forum is politically significant.
Okay, this one comes to us from our friend Tom. Says, what do historians like yourself think of those without PhDs who write books about history, particularly books on the American Revolution era?
Oh, particularly the American Revolution. Well, okay, so I'm gonna be a real historian here, and offer a spectrum response. So I think different historians respond differently, and I think this is, in a sense, not unrelated to how some people respond to historians who write books that are aimed at scholars and the public, right? I will readily say that my interest in having the public and not just scholars engage with my scholarship, which is indeed scholarship, there are some people who really poo-poo that. And I, with the last book, I was communicated to me, people were like, it's public history, doesn't matter. It's like, okay, it's actually deeply scholarly and has an argument and an intervention in the current scholarship, but it also is aimed at the public. So that, and that's true for a little group of people, but not for everybody, right? I think a lot of people realize, and of course, this is my view, it's really important for historians to engage with the public, right? We are immersed in the past. Who better to step forward and offer context the present? So not everyone needs to do that, but some people need to do that. So I think there's a spectrum of views. The same thing holds for people who are not necessarily trained historians, meaning no PhD or MA, but are writing histories. I think probably there are people who kind of look down their nose at those books, possibly because some of those books maybe don't have the kind of citing footnotes and things that enable people to see where the information comes from. And if you're a historian, that's, you really at least want to know what this person has been reading and looking at. But I think there are people who are not PhDs or MAs who write good history books. So I don't think that's a cut and ride kind of an answer. But I do think maybe part of the answer has to do with what I just said, which is, can you tell where the information is coming from, how the information is found? Of course, there are historical facts that as historians we can write about, but particularly if you're writing a book and you're making a claim and it isn't something that everybody knows, you really have to document where it came from. A million years ago, this is going to sound like the ultimate name dropping, and I don't mean it that way, but it was really interesting. A million years ago, I took part in a documentary on the Burr-Hamilton duel. Is that what this was? It was, and Richard Dreyfuss was involved in it. I want to say maybe he produced it way back.
Yes.
You remember this?
Yeah, I do, because he came to our school. Richard Dreyfuss literally came to the school where I used to teach in Richmond, Virginia. He was on this big mission to save civic education. He put his own money in it. And other celebrities were like, why are you doing that? Like it wasn't important. And he was great.
He really, I mean, this is a long time ago, but he was a really big, I don't want to say history fan, a promoter.
Oh, he really, particularly civics. And he's kind of saw the mess we're in now coming. And he said that to us. And I will never forget that, because the kids had no idea who he was until I said, Jaws.
Oz. Yeah.
So
So he,
different. He was older, he didn't look like he didn't,
right.
Then they were like, oh, the Jaws guy's coming. I'll totally go to that assembly.
So he asked me we were filming something, he wanted to actually to get a group of historians around a table and have us talk about I think Burr and Hamilton. But that didn't work really well because we were served food and no one wanted to talk. Like you couldn't eat the food because you don't want to talk with food in your mouth. It was weird. It didn't work and it didn't end up in the documentary. But while we were waiting for that to get set up, he came to me and he said, what's the difference between an academic book and a popular history book? Like, how could I tell the difference if I went to a bookstore? Which is a really interesting question, right? And I could answer it differently now because now, for a good long while, scholarly historians really just didn't want anything to do with the public at all. And now you really do. I just said more people should. There are a good number of historians who very explicitly address the public in a way that was not happening 20 years ago, for sure. So I'd answer it differently now. But at the time, what I said was, well, turn to the back of the book. And if it's a historical work, if it's a work by scholars, you're going to see a lot of footnotes, and they're not just going to be footnotes to other people's biographies and books. They're going to be footnotes to actual stuff, right? Historians in one way or another are going to have to grapple with the stuff of history and figure out, signpost where they found things. Now, I realize that's a partial simplified answer, but it was what I could come up with in the moment. And it relates to, I think, Cece says, how interesting that he asked. I thought I was really impressed with the degree to which he was really interested in history and that question. And I think that was a reasonable answer. As I said, I think now I couldn't do that because I think because historians have become more comfortable with addressing the public, despite the sort of holdover scorn, I think there's more of a gray area than there would have been a while back, which I think is a good thing. But there are still people who, as a historian, as a matter of fact, this is what I'll say. Sometimes people will come up to me, colleagues will come up to me and say, what do you think of blah, blah? And often blah, blah is a book that's not quite scholarly. And they want to know what I think. And that's interesting, right? And that partly depends on the research and the conclusions and the logic and, the ways in which you would judge anything. If I don't feel that it's sound in its conclusions, then I'll say, I don't know. I don't know if that's how reliable I think that thing is. But at least now I think there's more of a gray area when that is concerned. But that's a really good question.
All right, we've got lots more good questions. This one is coming from Kathleen V. It says, could you please elaborate on the independent state legislature case before the Supreme Court, why it may or may not concern our democracy?
Yeah, no, it will. So, and I'm going to give you a really general version of it because I don't want to do anything to lead anything astray. But the idea of that the founders intended state legislatures to be able to weigh in on independent state legislatures on electoral outcomes, national electoral outcomes, that's a problem. And again, I don't want to go into great detail here, but some of the evidence that people who are making that claim are relying, this gets back to evidence, I was indeed, Tom, part of a brief that was filed on this case. And one of the things I found in working on this brief was a big part of the argument, the evidence that the people who are saying, yes, indeed, there is an independent state legislature, that's totally constitutional. The thing that they're hanging on to is supposedly from the Constitutional Convention and has to do with what the founders intended, except it doesn't really actually exist in the form that they claim, right? So what was interesting was it was a group of, 10 of us, maybe. And I'm not an expert on the specific documents of the Constitutional Convention and who said what and how and literally, is this a memo, who wrote it like really down to the nitty-gritty details. But others were, and they were like, no, there's like this scrap of paper, but it doesn't say this. Oh, there's this. And so it was fascinating because it was really people grappling with evidence. The way, obviously, the way in which that gets in the way of democracy is once again finding another way to get in the way of our electoral process, and claiming that the founders intended it is nonsense. It makes no sense. But I don't know, right now we have a court that makes a lot of claims about what history says. So I don't know. But at any rate, there are a number of briefs signed. I think someone said Arnold Schwarzenegger filed a brief.
So I saw something about it. They said he made comments on the case.
At any rate, I think that
we'll have it in the chat in 2 seconds. Somebody will find the link to Arnold Schwarzenegger's comments.
The deadline for submitting stuff was like a couple of days ago. But the interesting part was engaging in conversation with these other people. And again, they were far greater experts than I am in the nature of this argument. It was like Jack Rakove was kind of rounding it up, and Rosie Zagari smack in the middle of it. Mary Bilder, who wrote about Madison's notes of the convention. They were like people who are really in the midst of this. And people had very strong feelings about it, but they were really talking about the evidence. What can we prove or not prove? What does the evidence actually say? Right? So there you have people acting like historians, right? This is what it says. And this is what it means. And this thing doesn't exist. This plan, this idea that you're saying, look, anyway. So yes, it could very much affect democracy. You can just, I don't even have to say how and why that would shape the way our electoral process works or doesn't work. So it's really important. I think is it November? I can't remember now when that case is. Yeah. Anyway, that's before the Supreme Court now.
Okay. This one comes from Dale. It says Stacy Schiff was interviewed by Walter Isaacson last night about her book on Sam Adams. She argues Sam was a forgotten revolutionary, and Dale wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I will answer that in a moment. I do want to answer Bobby, who said, where would you go to find a collection of historical firsthand documents from the Constitutional Convention? Because I can answer that. The Library of Congress has a website, which I don't know the address to, but if you Google a century of lawmaking, it has all kinds of congressional documents there in primary form. And on the left-hand side of that page, because I've used that page a lot, on the left-hand side of the page, it'll say something like Farrand's Notes, F-A-R-R-A-N-D, Farrand's Notes. Farrand is a person who pulled together all of these documents about the Constitutional Convention, and that's what's been put up on this website. So if you want to see what's actually said at the convention, granted with some questions and things mixed in, but still a lot of what's actually said, you can find it in Farrand's, I think, 5 volumes of notes, and they're up thanks to the Library of Congress on their Century of Lawmaking website, along with the Congressional Record, and the anyway, I won't keep going, but any number of sort of government documents related to Congress are just sitting there happily, waiting for you. So anyway, so Sam Adams, is he a forgotten revolutionary? Well, I guess I would say, whenever I say like, yes and no, like, I'm such a historian, but I would say yes and no, because I think that everyone knows his name. First of all, Sam, he's probably Samuel Adams. I don't know if he's Sam, but at any rate, people know the name. And I do think it's partly because of the beer. I do.
Absolutely.
They know
younger people. They're like, oh, the beer guy.
Exactly. They know Sam Adams. They know John Adams. They know he has something to do with the revolution. I don't think anyone really, well, I'm going to back that up. I think the majority of people don't know what he did. Or how he did it, or why he did it, or so in a sense, he's a forgotten revolutionary because I think his actual revolutionary activities and writings are not in the public mind in any way. So he probably, isn't if you're looking at the cluster, the bundle of things that came together, particularly in Massachusetts, to shape the public mindset and to slowly move people to the point where they were willing to back away from the king, Samuel Adams is a big part of that. But I think mostly as a name, you know, when I start my American Revolution lecture course, I will sometimes say to students, many of you are coming in here, and I know you have in your head Paul Revere, The British Are Coming, John Adams, Sam Adams, Declaration of Independence, you know, and I named a number of things like that. And that's your revolution, which is understandable. But there's, you know, obviously those are the things floating around out in space that somehow or other have decided that they have a place in our general consciousness. Obviously, that's kind of a random collection of names that people who happen in one way or another to be important, but again, people might know Sam Adams' name, they don't know why. So forgotten in a sense, I'd say yes. Although people, oh, I'm going to come back to that, Cece, you're totally right. People know his name, but I think he's forgotten, yes, because people don't know what he did. Cece just said, Paul Revere never said the British are coming, and that is true. You know why we know that? Because the people saying it were British. And
That should be a Saturday Night Live skit right there.
revolution hasn't happened yet, right? So people aren't saying the British are coming, they're British. The redcoats are coming, I don't know what, you know, but it sure as heck wasn't the British are coming.
So in Virginia, we have the story of Jack Jewett.
Oh yeah?
He was like Virginia's version of Paul Revere. So he rode from, this is literally a zip code, Cuckoo, Virginia, like the bird. There's a town in Virginia outside of Charlottesville called Cuckoo. And the story is that Jack Jewett rode from Cuckoo Tavern to Monticello all night, crossed the Rivanna River to warn Jefferson and everybody that was hiding out at Monticello that the British were coming. And then he rode down the mountain into Charlottesville to then tell so half the Virginia Assembly was hiding at Jefferson's house and half was hiding at this other tavern. And so that we've always pushed back on the Paul Revere thing because we're like, we have the real Paul Revere. His name is Jack Jewett.
Pushed back on. And you know, Sarah Palin said something about this. You know, Paul Revere.
Oh, she did.
And the reason I remember that is because then people went on Wikipedia and tried to correct it. So it agreed with her. But so those of you who are saying, you know, that's not true, correct. A number of you are saying the regulars. He said the regulars are coming, which would make far more sense. Also, Tim has posted an article from 2009, Sam Adams, Forgotten Founder, ? By Brendan McConville. So that's there too. And Cece said there's a blog post that she did on that myth, the British are coming. So yeah, but I just love the fact that no one thinks about the fact that it's British people yelling at.
Sarah Palin somehow had the British are coming and the Liberty Bell like all mixed up in the same bizarro comment. And if I remember this correctly, that was the first time that Wikipedia had to lock an article because people kept going and changing it to make Sarah Palin look smarter.
Yes. Yes.
And then Wikipedia would have to go back and put the facts in and then 5 seconds. So they finally locked the article.
I remember that. And that was an early time when people, media outlets were coming to me and asking me about that. Certainly wasn't used to it at the time, but they wanted to know, like, you know, and it's actually pretty self-explanatory when you explain the reason why. Kind of hard to refute that.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's why it was such a big deal. It was, you know, our own people, our, you know, granted, they're not from the colonies, but we are British subjects, and the British, our troops, are killing us. That was part of the shock of it. So anyway, I'll stop being outraged on behalf of something that we don't have to be outraged at. But indeed, Cece, thank you.
Yeah, that was a good one. Okay, our good friend Rabbi Beth asked, I just watched a film on Amazon about Benedict Arnold attempting to show why he did what he did and how he got to that point. What are your thoughts? I haven't seen this film. I'm not sure what it's called, but
Yeah, I haven't either. Okay, so some general thoughts. So Benedict Arnold certainly was really ambitious, right? And for a while, he was a real hero for what he did, his fighting at Saratoga and a number of other things. He was the New Haven boy, he's a local boy. But he was very ambitious and he very much wanted to be promoted in the ranks. And Washington, commander-in-chief, for very logical reasons, couldn't just promote whoever he wanted because every state wanted their own people promoted. So he had to actually very carefully decide who to promote or who not to promote based on where they were from. It's not the only reason that Arnold became frustrated, but he was frustrated that he wasn't rising fast enough. And apparently, his wife did not lead him to be ambitious, but she was certainly politically minded and in it with him, and ended up being used as, actually, if you go to my American Revolution course online, so if you Google American Revolution, Joanne Freeman, History 116, Open Yale courses, any combination of those things, you'll find it. There is a lecture in there on this very topic in which I talk about all of the ways in which that one incident shows you so much about the time period. Peggy Shippen Arnold, ended up being used as a mediator between Arnold and the British through John Andre, who was basically an aide, a favorite of a British general. So the British general would communicate something to Andre. Andre would find a way to communicate it to either Benedict Arnold or Peggy Shippen Arnold. She would be writing letters, and essentially people assumed that a lady writing letters, she wasn't saying anything obvious, but it was understood that some of what was in those letters was key to what was going on. And people didn't really suspect what she was doing because she was a she. So there are any number of ways. Actually, another way in which this was very typical of the time is that ultimately John Andre is caught. I can't remember if he's going to or coming back. I think leaving a meeting with Arnold, and he's found and he's caught. And someone says they stopped him because they saw he was dressed as, not like a soldier. They saw powder on his ribbon and in his hair a little bit, which meant that he was a gentleman. So the people who stopped him were like, "What are you doing out here?" And hey, like, you're someone of rank. And everything began to unfold. So it's a combination of ambition, the sort of rules and regulations for people being promoted, and then it becoming very clear, the British wanted West Point. Arnold was, offered in one way or another command of West Point. There was an obvious opportunity. The drama of it, and I definitely, if you don't know about it, go find it. The drama of it is that the plot unfolds as Washington is on his way to the Arnold household. Already there are Hamilton and a number of other aides, and they're with Peggy Shippen Arnold, and papers start to come in and people are delivering things, and it's very clear that something's happening and it's not good. And then it becomes clear that, Arnold has turned and everyone is shocked, and Peggy Shippen Arnold begins crying, "My baby, my baby." Hamilton, apparently I don't know if she was in a negligee or whatever it is, she was scantily dressed. So of course Hamilton notes this. "Oh, I wish to be her champion," I think he says. At any rate, very dramatic. And Arnold, goes to a British ship in the harbor. So long story. But I would say, lump ambition, opportunity in the mix. But it stunned people because he was a hero. He was an American hero. And then this happened. It was a huge, big deal. As a matter of fact, recently I was at West Point, meeting with people about a project of some kind. And for the first time, I've been there before, but not, we were brought to forts around the main West Point fort so that we could get a sense of what was happening there militarily. And I tell you, you can totally see why West Point is this key in affecting what's going on, to the north or to the south. It's like this place where you can see the river that come together, and you could see there's a place where, anyway, it was fascinating to see militarily why West Point was significant at the moment, and why it played the role that it did, and why it was so important for the Americans to keep and protect. One last thing I'll say before we go on, and that is, I know I've talked about Powder House Day before, have I? In like 2 sentences, New Haven celebrates Benedict Arnold every year because he's a local boy. And when news of Lexington and Concord got down to New Haven, Arnold wanted the keys to the Powder House to arm them, his troops, basically, his little unit of troops. And he wanted to ride up to Massachusetts and fight. And he ended up banging on the door of what was essentially City Hall, Town Hall, and demanding the keys to the Powder House. And Powder House Day, they reenact that every year in New Haven in April. Someone plays Arnold every year. The people reenacting it are a military unit, descended from the original unit. And then they parade on the green and they shoot guns off, and then there's a cannon. And I lived in New Haven for 10 years and this happened and I never knew it. Like, how did I not hear a cannon? I lived like 3 blocks away. So.
Wow. Well, they told us to make sure we don't get it confused with Chowder Fest.
Oh, no, I don't even know.
Powder House Day is apparently sometimes
Powder House Day,
Powder
Powder House
Fest.
Which I learned of from a taxi driver.
The Chowder Fest or the Powder Day?
No, a Powder House. I'm in a taxi.
Wow.
I talk
I'm a taxi driver.
I talk to everyone, right?
Yep.
And sometimes I pay the price. And I was chatting with the taxi driver. He's like, "Oh, you teach the American Revolution. You must know all about Powder House Day."
Yep.
Powder House Day? Really? It's like, "Oh, let me tell you about it." Of course, I get to my office and I'm like,
Well, I think I told you before about the Hatchet Day in Delaware, where the 2 people, no matter who won, the winner and loser, come together and bury a real hatchet in the town square in Georgetown, Delaware. And everybody comes out, and it's supposed to be a way that says it doesn't matter who won or lost. Now we're going to accept the winner and we're going to wish them well because they're representing all of us now. And it was a local person that told us that when we stopped for gas, because we didn't know what the crowd was. So I love those kind of local holidays. We're getting mug in the chat, but we have more questions. So it's up to you.
Here. I was like, I looked up at the clock in the corner. I was like, wait, is it mug time?
No, people are like anxious. But anyway, this one comes from Dave. It says, "Dr. Friedman, would you like to say a few words on the stunning and depressing rise in anti-Semitism that's been in the media a lot the recent days and weeks?"
Sure. So as a matter of fact, last night when I wasn't sleeping, I saw that the former chief rabbi in Russia has told Jews to flee. So there's that. I think historically speaking, when people are anxious and things feel unstable anywhere in the world, the Jews come under attack. They seem like a cohesive group, right? It's always assumed that there's like some secret Jewish network conspiracy that controls everything, and we all have headphones on somehow, and whatever, the nonsense. But at any rate, there's always this assumption that the Jews, they're a group and they're together and they don't believe in Jesus. And who knows what they're doing, and they, do weird things and stay off to themselves. And this is long-standing and grounded in, they're called libels, nonsense that is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. So the fact that we're now in this moment where people are feeling very unstable and they don't know where things are going and they're worried and they want to find something to blame, it is not at all surprising to me that Jews are right in the crosshairs. It does not surprise me in the slightest. Now, that said, people of color have been in the crosshairs forever too. So what's changed now is that there's been more added in to the group of people who seem threatening. In this case, though, It's because in the minds of some of the people attacking Jews have power. They're scary, so they need to be attacked. You know, when I was growing up, and I lived in a town in Westchester that was really anti-Semitic. So I grew up knowing about anti-Semitism, being told that I had killed Jesus, all this crazy people used Jew as a, Jew this person down, or would throw money and say miser Jew, pick it up. And it was charming. But what I thought as a kid, probably because of that, and Sunday school and, at the synagogue that I went to, was essentially you're never safe as a Jew. You're never safe as a Jew. Wherever you are, whoever you are, it is never absolutely safe. It just isn't. And when I started doing backstory, I remember Brian Balogh in one episode admitted to being Jewish. And I remember pausing and thinking, whoa, like, would I admit that publicly? Because it felt like such a vulnerability. Like, do I want people to know broadly that I'm Jewish? And it was on Backstory that for the first time I made that, no one would know, but to me, I knew that on the podcast, I talked about being Jewish in a way that I never had in any public forum ever before. And to me, who felt so at risk, that felt like a big deal. And I felt like I was being brave. Now I talk about it a lot. And the reason I talk about it a lot is precisely because of the moment that we're in, and because I think sometimes people don't hear the anti-Semitism in some things. They don't understand or see or pick up on some things that are really, really, really obviously anti-Semitic. So the presence of it isn't surprising. The fact that it's not getting countered really in any way by anyone of authority is alarming. What I just saw in Russia is alarming. It's the main target group when you're in this kind of moment, because Jews are like a group, but they have power. Really handy to blame. So I can't even tell you the degree to which now, given that I, as a kid, assumed Jews are never safe, ever, 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 and I kind of got myself down from that ledge. I'm back on the ledge, man. So, part of me just feels like I'm living out what I always assumed was going to happen in one way or another. That's a weird headspace to be in. It truly is. And I know I'm not alone in worrying about this. And what do I do with that? Other than step forward and acknowledge that I'm Jewish, and that's anti-Semitism, and it's nonsense, and it's being used as a political tool and a political wedge, and that needs to be exposed for what it is.
Yeah, I just put the link to the episode called Judaism in America. Do you remember if that was the episode? Was that the episode theme about Judaism, and that's why you and Brian both shared that? Or
no, Brian was just talking about being a kid and being Jewish in some way in Florida. I can't remember what it was. It was just in conversation. And I just remember first being stunned, and either in that episode or in an episode not that long after, I remember acknowledging that I was Jewish. And I know that there's nothing noteworthy about it to anyone else, but to me, that felt so brave, right? It was like, oh my God, I'm vulnerable now. First of all, as though in one way or another, people wouldn't know that in some other way through something else I did or something else I said or whatever. But at any rate, yeah. I don't know what's happening here. Rabbi Beth is saying, you agree? Is that it? Right. I remember, I've been thinking about this too. When I was in college, I had a semester overseas in England, and we took a tour of Jewish London. And there was some point at which we were shown different synagogues, and they all had bulletproof glass and cameras, because I just saw someone say that their synagogue now has that here. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that's not like where I live is so much better than that. right? That's not what we have. And so I've been thinking about that a lot in recent last couple of years too, because I can't necessarily say that anymore. So between 1983, 82 and the present, yeah, here's where we are. So anyway, I'll stop. I will say the fact that I'll say it again at the end. I know we're nearing the end, but the fact that we're here talking about this and that you asked about it and that we can talk about it, that's pretty important. It really is. So, you know, and at least now you guys know part of my anxiety is actually that I am anxious about so many things about democracy, but I have the extra added bonus of just that inescapable feeling. And people attack me, as you know, with anti-Semitism all the time on Twitter. And some of it has been shockingly not just blunt, but crude. I mean, really crude. For someone who grew up in an anti-Semitic community, even I have been shocked once or twice. So it's charming. Anyway, okay, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm sorry that I brought the whole conversation down.
It's important. We need to talk about these things.
We do. So
guidance processing these things, and that's why these conversations every Friday are important.
And you know, I've talked to some friends along these lines, and I do think the Jews have a kind of Judar that others don't have necessarily, right? So I actually think it's important for Jews to be able to voice what feels threatening in ways that I don't blame people for not necessarily understanding fully the threat. So,
yeah. Well, and yeah. Rabbi Beth was asking if maybe one time you might consider inviting some of your colleagues, like Yale or other colleagues, to do like a Friday morning with us, to have like a discussion with some of your.
Sure. I mean, we haven't done that so much, but we could certainly think about it. And thank you, Melissa. And I do too. Okay, so a couple things are going to happen now. We have to do the mug.
Yep.
And we have a small surprise announcement. So first the mug.
Okay.
First the mug. You've got to stick around for the small surprise announcement. Oops. And it was not necessarily easy to figure out which mug was the appropriate mug for today. But it represents something that is always unpredictable. And in one way or another, certainly in my life, represents anything goes. And that is Newbie.
I love that.
He pretty much
home, so I didn't have any of my mugs with me.
Oh, of course.
I have orange juice today.
Once or twice I didn't have a mug, which I was horrified by, but Newbie represents the anything goes in my life right now. So
Newbie definitely does. That's so great.
Yeah, he's no longer screeching, but at any rate. So that was my mug choice. Okay, now we do want to make a surprise announcement before I offer my closing. And I'm going to, I guess Sarah's going to come back for this, I think. There she is.
Here I am. People were wondering who the extra person was on here today. And I'm Sarah Drake Brown, Interim Executive Director of NCHE. I'm often in the background, you just don't see me. But today you get to see me because I have a special announcement. I'm going to be, because this is so important, I'm going to be a bit more formal than you guys often are on your show. So for some context, each year since 2007, NCHE has awarded the Paul A. Gagnon Prize. This prize is named for NCHE's co-founder and professor of history at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, Paul Gagnon. And the award goes to a teacher, individual, or group who has made a significant contribution to the promotion of history education. Dr. Joanne Freeman's dedication to History Matters and So Does Coffee, and her continuing advocacy for historical thinking, both on this show and beyond this program, exemplifies that of the public scholar and exactly captures the late Paul Gagnon's ideals and commitment to promoting deep public conversations about our collective past, present, and future. What a wonderful day to pick to make this announcement, because that truly happened today. And I am therefore pleased to formally announce that the 2023 winner of NCHE's Paul Gagnon Prize is Dr. Joanne Freeman. Congratulations, Joanne.
Thank you, Sarah. You can't see that I'm teary behind the glasses, so I'm a little verklempt.
Well, I'll just keep talking for a second then and give you a moment. We wanted to announce this first. You guys are the first to hear it here, so live on the show today. But it's also really important because what we do at NCHE is we give the award at our conference. This year will be in Salt Lake City, March 23rd through 25th. And we're going to do something special with Joanne. So because she's so dedicated to this program occurring every Friday, she's going to pre-record a regular version of the show, and it will air at its regular time on Friday, March 24th. But then on Saturday, March 25th, she is going to host a version of this program live at the conference at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30, a little bit early in Salt Lake City. And we wanted to share this information with you guys so that if you are so inclined and you're able, you dedicated members of her community can attend the conference. Our early bird registration does close on Tuesday. So in just a second, I'll put the link in there so it'll be easy for people to find that, but you can always find it on our webpage. But thank you so much, Joanne. We're just so indebted to you for the work that you've been doing the past couple of years. And I cannot say enough how important it is to have scholars engaging with the public on such a personal, deep, emotional level, but always being an intellectual at the same time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah and NCHE. I can't even tell you how much this means to me. In the same way that this program and this community has come to mean so much to me over the last 134 episodes. I thank you. I can't even express the degree to which this means something, particularly coming from you guys and this community. So, and it also means that I'm going to get to meet some of you folks in person. There's going to be a meetup. So I will actually get to see you. I have no idea what it will be like to do a live episode with actual other people in the room.
Well, you guys did backstory live episodes before, right? You've done a few of those.
One or two, yeah. But I've never done this except with newbie.
Well, that everybody's asking in the chat. There's millions of people going bonkers if you can't see in the chat, like applaud. But people are like, is newbie coming to Salt Lake?
I wish I could bring newbie. You got to know he's way too nervous a bird for.
That's a long flight for a bird.
It's a long flight for a bird, and newbie. This would not make him happy, but he'll be there represented in some way.
But if we get the newbie cam set up, we could see him while we're
Anyway, okay, let me transition us now, since we're a little over it, but thank you so much, Sarah and NCHE. I am actually verklempt. So as I kind of hinted at during this episode, this is so important that we meet here and engage in democracy, the conversation of democracy every Friday morning. Today, I think, was a fine example of why it's important, because we can talk about things here that in some ways you can't talk about elsewhere, with a community of people that have different knowledge bases, different opinions, and can share them safely in this space. So in the same way that this certainly matters to me personally, I think politically and as an American citizen, it really matters that we're here and that we do this as a group every week and have done it for as long as we have. I now will do what always happens at this point in the episode, which is I will, well, me back it up. I'm so verklempt from that announcement that I'm like losing the train of thought of the thing I have said 134 times. I know exactly. We're now going to segue into the after party. And that means that we'll be able to engage with each other in a less formal way. Not that we've been formal at all. What that means is that we will turn off the stop recording. I once before said turn off the camera. That would be really boring. I know, we will stop recording so that we can engage with each other more freely. If you are joining us on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and join us through the NCHE website at ncheteach.org/conversations. Connect with that and you'll be in the after party. And I forgot what needs to be there. You will be in the after party poof. You can tell how shaken up I am if I'm forgetting my lines. At any rate, and Newbie also will be there in the background. I don't know what you're so overwrought about, noobs, but at any rate, thank you guys for coming. Newbie, that was Newbie's poof. I hope you guys have a really safe week. Stay safe, be nice to yourselves, and be nice to everybody else. And I will see you in a week. And he is cheering the award. Yeah, it's his too. Poof. Yes, there should be a History Bird Award. At any rate, thank you for being here, folks, and I will see you in a week.